There is a particular kind of tiredness that does not want anything new. At the end of a long day, the mind does not reach for a story it has never heard. It reaches instead for the one it already knows by heart. The show it can follow with its eyes closed, where every voice arrives exactly where it is expected and nothing has to be decoded. For a great many people, that show is a sponge who lives at the bottom of the sea. You do not need to watch to know what happens. You can feel the shape of the laugh before it lands, the pitch of the snail, the slow, patient cruelty of a squid who only wanted quiet. The yellow light of it plays across the ceiling, and half awake, you drift on the sound of a world that was built, from its earliest frames, to feel like somewhere warm. Tonight is given over to something else, to wandering slowly through the strange ideas that have grown up around that world, the small suspicions and quiet questions that viewers have carried for years. 100 obscure theories, told softly, one after another, meant to be listened to and not finished. Some are playful, some are stranger than the series ever intended. None of them require you to stay awake. Welcome to Krabby. This is a place for the long, slow end of the day, for stories told at the pace of breathing, where the goal is never to hold your attention but to let it go. So settle in wherever you are. Loosen whatever is still holding tension, let the pillow take the weight of your head, and turn the light down until the room goes soft. There is nowhere to be and nothing to keep track of. You can close your eyes now. The theories will keep coming, gently, whether you follow every one of them or not, and it is perfectly all right to fall asleep somewhere in the middle. Somewhere in the central Pacific Ocean, in the chain of islands known as the Marshall Islands, there is a ring of coral called Bikini Atoll. It is a real place. You could find it on a map. Roughly 23 small islands arranged in a broken circle around a central lagoon, the whole thing shaped like a wedding band dropped into blue water. For most of human history, it was simply a home, quiet and green, sitting far from anywhere. And then, for a stretch of years in the middle of the 20th century, it became a piece of ground more violently altered than almost anywhere on the planet. Between 1946 and 1958, the United States detonated more than 20 nuclear weapons at Bikini Atoll. The exact count is either 23 or 24, depending on how one test is attributed to the atolls nearby. But the difference of a single bomb hardly changes the shape of the thing. The combined yield of those detonations came to something like 77 or 78 megatons of energy, an amount so far beyond ordinary human scale that the numbers stop meaning very much. What matters is the picture. A ring of coral in the open ocean, chosen deliberately, used again and again as a place to break the atom apart and watch what happened. Before any of that began, there were people living there. In 1946, a United States Navy Commodore named Ben Wyatt came to the atoll and asked its residents, 167 of them, to leave. He framed the request as something noble. He asked them to go, in effect, for the good of mankind. They agreed, and they were moved to Rongerik Atoll, an island roughly 125 miles away, a place with limited food and limited fresh water, a place that could not easily sustain them. Think about the phrasing for a moment. For the good of mankind. It is the kind of sentence that sounds gentle and generous, while it is asking someone to give up everything they have ever known. The first tests came that same year, gathered under the name Operation Crossroads. The first was called Able, a bomb of about 23 kilotons, dropped from the air and detonated on the 1st of July. The second was called Baker, a bomb of the same size, set off underwater on the 25th of July. Both were tested against a target fleet, a collection of old and obsolete warships anchored in the lagoon and left there to see what the blast would do to them. Ships arranged in still water, waiting to be destroyed for the sake of measurement. That is how the atoll began its second life, not as a home but as an experiment with an audience of empty hulls. The largest of all of it came later, on the 1st of March 1954. Its name was Castle Bravo, and it remains the biggest nuclear device the United States ever tested. Its yield was about 15 megatons. To give that a shape you can hold, it was roughly 1,000 times the size of the bomb dropped on Hiroshima, and it was not even supposed to be that large. The people who built it had predicted something in the range of 4 to 8 megatons. It far exceeded their own expectations, roughly doubling or tripling what they thought they were making. There is something faintly frightening in that detail. The people closest to the weapon, the ones who understood it best, still did not fully understand what they had built until it went off. The fallout did not stay at the atoll. It drifted. A Japanese fishing boat named the Lucky Dragon No. 5 was contaminated while it sat nearly 100 miles away, far enough that its crew must have believed themselves safe. Radioactive material spread further still, carried across the world, reaching as far as India, Japan, Australia, and Europe. The reaction was global condemnation. A test conducted on a remote ring of coral had reached, in a matter of days, onto other continents, into other lives, and the world responded with alarm and anger. The atoll itself never fully recovered. The people who had been moved away found no easy road home. Some Bikinians attempted to resettle their home in 1969, and for a while it seemed possible. But in 1978, they were evacuated again, once radiation levels were found to be unsafe. To this day, Bikini Atoll remains largely uninhabited, its soil and its water still carrying the residue of what was done there. A home that became a laboratory, and then a place too poisoned to live in. That is the real history, and it is not a theory. It is documented, and it is settled. Now hold that history in your mind, and turn to something that seems, on its surface, entirely unrelated. In that same summer of 1946, only 4 days after the Able test lit up the Pacific, a French engineer named Louis Rayard unveiled a new swimsuit in Paris. It debuted on the 5th of July. He named it the Bikini, and he named it after the atoll on purpose. His reasoning was, in effect, that the cultural shock of his design would be as explosive as the bomb. He was borrowing the imagery of the detonation to sell a two-piece swimsuit. The name of a poisoned island became, almost overnight, the name of a fashion, and most of the people who used the word for the rest of the century would have no idea what it originally marked. So the word travels. It begins as the name of a coral ring in the Marshall Islands. It passes through a French designer's marketing instinct and becomes a swimsuit. And then, decades later, it arrives at the bottom of the sea in a cartoon. Bikini Bottom, the undersea city where SpongeBob SquarePants lives, is a pun that folds both of those meanings together. The swimsuit joke sits right on the surface, the cheeky reading, the bottom half of a bikini, but underneath it is the atoll itself, because the cartoon places its city on the ocean floor, directly beneath the real-world Bikini Atoll. The pineapple, the crusty crab, the winding roads, all of it drawn as though it rests in the water below the exact spot where the United States tested its bombs. For a long time, this was the sort of thing fans passed around in whispers, a connection you could make on your own by looking at a map and reading the name twice. It was the kind of theory that felt almost too neat to be intentional. And then, in 2024, it stopped being a theory at all. In a group interview with Esquire, Doug Lawrence, known to audiences as Mr. Lawrence, a longtime writer on the show and the voice of Plankton, was asked about the idea directly. He confirmed it. By most accounts, his answer left no real room for doubt. That it is absolutely true. There is no hedging in that phrasing, nothing left open at all. A person who helped make the series said plainly that the connection is real. He went further, and this is where the whole thing settles into something heavier than a naming coincidence. In the same interview, Lawrence described how the creative team had talked among themselves about the premise, asking, in effect, how far they were willing to take the concept. He characterized the world of the show as one where the world upstairs is gone, and this is what is left. Sit with that for a moment. The world upstairs is gone. It is a small sentence, spoken casually, but it reframes the entire cheerful surface of the cartoon. The brightness, the pineapple, the endless sunny mornings at the Krusty Krab, all of it imagined as the thing that remains after the surface world above has ended. This is a very different idea from the theories you may have heard elsewhere, the ones that argue each character represents a stage of some individual tragedy, or that the cast are ghosts of one kind or another. Those are readings imposed on it from outside. What Lawrence described is something the makers actually discussed, a post-apocalyptic frame built into the setting from the ground up. Not the death of a character, but the absence of an entire world above. The town does not sit beneath an ordinary ocean. It sits beneath the specific patch of sea, where humanity rehearsed its own capacity for erasure. In the place it emptied of people first. That is the quiet horror folded inside the joke. The reason this particular pun rewards a slow second look. A swimsuit named for a bomb. A city named for the swimsuit. a cartoon that placed its happiest possible inhabitants directly under the water above the most nuclear-scarred ground on Earth. And then, when asked, confirmed that yes, the connection was deliberate, and yes, the world upstairs is meant to be gone. The residents of the real atoll were asked to leave for the good of mankind, and were never truly allowed to return. Far below where they once lived, in the imagination of a children's show, someone drew a bright yellow sponge waking up each morning in a world where the surface has already ended, and none of the people down there seem to know it, or need to. Consider the suit first, because the suit is where this theory begins. Whenever Sandy leaves her tree dome, she must wear an astronaut-like diving suit and a water and air helmet, because she needs oxygen to survive in the water-filled world of Bikini Bottom, and she removes that gear only inside the air-filled dome she has built for herself. That is the plain fact of it, established right from her very first appearance, the one where SpongeBob visits her tree dome for tea. But a theory is a way of looking, and the fans who imagine Sandy as an escapee from some secret laboratory begin exactly here, with the observation that she is the only creature on screen who cannot breathe the air the story takes for granted. Everyone else belongs. She arrives sealed. She moves through this town like a specimen that has been let out of containment, carrying her own atmosphere on her back, and the theory asks you to sit with how strange that actually is once you stop treating it as a costume. Steven Hillenburg confirmed the visual intention himself. He said that he designed Sandy's signature suit to evoke an astronaut, and that single design choice is the seed of everything the lab escapee reading grows from. Think about what an astronaut suit signals to an audience before a single word is spoken. It signals a person who is somewhere they were not built to be, kept alive by engineering, sent by an institution to a place that would otherwise kill them. The theory takes that costume literally and asks a simple question. If she looks like she was sent, who sent her, and what were they studying, and what happened to make her stay? None of that is stated in the series. But the suit is real, and the intention behind the suit is on the record, and a good theory only needs a real detail to lean against. The show gives that leaning point a name. In the episode where SpongeBob first visits the tree dome for tea, Sandy tells him that she came to Bikini Bottom to study sea creatures and their lifestyles, though she never names any organization behind that work. That detail would only come to light much later. Hold that word for a moment, because it changes the shape of her character. Sandy is not a tourist who wandered down into the sea. She is a researcher on assignment, embedded, observing the locals and their lifestyles the way a field scientist observes a colony. The gentle joke of the early episodes is that SpongeBob and Patrick are the exotic wildlife, and Sandy is the one taking notes. The lab escapee theory simply refuses to let that joke stay a joke. If she was sent by an organization to study a population, then she is an agent of that organization, and an agent who stops reporting back is, in the language the theory prefers, an escapee. For a long time, BOOTS was only that, a set of initials with no expansion, and the mystery did most of the work. Then, in 2024, the feature titled Saving Bikini Bottom, subtitled The Sandy Cheeks Movie, finally spelled it out. BOOTS stands for the Bureau of Official Texas Science, and it is a marine biology research lab located in Galveston, Texas. This is where the theory and the canon shake hands, and also where a careful narrator has to slow down and be honest with you. The word most people reach for in the theory is military, or NASA, some agency of secrets and clearances. What the film actually gives us is a state science bureau, a marine biology lab, a real and rather bureaucratic institution. It is less sinister than the theory wants, and yet it is an institution, official and governmental in flavor, that funds a scientist to leave the surface world entirely and live sealed inside a foreign environment to observe its inhabitants. The romance of the secret lab reading survives the reveal, even as the specifics turn out to be gentler than the fan imagination. The same movie also, almost accidentally, hands the darker version of this theory its strongest image. The film's villain, Sue Nami, runs a scheme to genetically modify the fish of Bikini Bottom into air breathers, using a device called a gene machine, working in 3 phases, and then to clone those modified fish and sell them, mass-marketed as toys called Sea Pals. Set the theory aside and just look at what that plot contains. A laboratory-driven plan to biologically alter an entire underwater population, so that it can survive out of water, followed by cloning and commercial exploitation. This is, in the plain text of an official film, the exact nightmare the escapee theory has always projected onto Sandy's own origin. The film makes Sandy the hero who stops it, of course. But the fan reading notices that the movie proves such laboratories, such plans, such a willingness to re-engineer sea life for the surface exist inside this fictional world. The horror is canon. It simply belongs to the antagonist rather than to Sandy. And a suspicious mind will point out that heroes and escapees often come from the very institutions they end up running from. Now the theory has to reckon with Texas, and Texas is where the ground gets genuinely uncertain, which is why fans keep returning to it. Hillenburg stated that Sandy Cheeks is from Houston, that is the creator's word, and ordinarily that would settle the matter. Except that some readers familiar with the Texas landscape have pointed out something that does not fit. The way Sandy's home is described on screen, wide open unobstructed land and endless sky, does not match Houston, which is a dense urban city, and that mismatch creates a real discrepancy in her own stated hometown, one that fans have argued over. This is not a fan invention layered onto the series. This is a professional observation about an inconsistency between what the creator said and what the episodes depict. For the escapee theory, a wrong or unstable hometown is not a small thing. A cover story often includes a hometown that does not quite survive scrutiny. When the paper trail on a person's origin does not line up, the imagination fills the gap, and the gap here is real enough that even a Texas magazine felt the need to write about it. The cartoon keeps returning to that Texas identity in ways the theory loves to collect. In one episode, Sandy rakes the fallen autumn leaves of her tree dome into a pile shaped like the state of Texas, an image of homesickness rendered as landscaping, the map of a homeland assembled from dead leaves inside a glass bubble at the bottom of the ocean. In another episode, the one simply titled Texas, that homesickness becomes a plot. Sandy grows homesick, quits her job at a firm the episode calls Tree Dome Enterprises Limited, and prepares to move back to Texas, before finally deciding that Bikini Bottom is her true home. Read tenderly, that is a story about an immigrant choosing a new home. Read through the theory's lens, it is the story of an agent who nearly returns to her handlers and then, at the last moment, defects for good, choosing the population she was sent to study over the institution that sent her. Both readings use the same facts. That is the honest thing about this theory. It does not need to alter a single event. It only changes the light. Then there is the matter of what Sandy is capable of, because the escapee reading is really a reading about competence that exceeds its explanation. In one early episode, she has built and stores a functioning rocket ship inside her tree dome, a rocket she intends to fly to the moon. A squirrel living underwater has private access to spacefaring hardware, kept out of sight in her home. Set beside the astronaut suit, the rocket stops looking like a gag and starts looking like a pattern. The pattern of someone with training and resources that a lone field researcher for a state marine biology bureau would not obviously possess. And her body itself behaves like something being managed. In the hibernation episode, she explains that she must sleep for a week the way a real squirrel does, and beforehand she drives SpongeBob through extreme physical stunts because, as she puts it, she cannot burn carbs while asleep. She is monitoring her own biology with a precision that sounds almost clinical, preparing her system for a shutdown the way one might prepare an instrument. A careful narrator should say clearly where interpretation ends. Hillenburg also said that he created Sandy to be a strong female character, who could be a friend to SpongeBob but not a love interest. And that is the truest origin of her, the intention behind the design. She was built to be capable, independent, and unromantic in the plot sense. And every trait the theory borrows, the suit, the science, the rocket, the self-sufficiency, flows from that one honest creative goal. The lab escapee story is a shadow the character casts because she was made strong enough to cast one. It is not what the show is telling you. It is what the series, by being consistent about a sealed, brilliant, homesick scientist from a place that does not quite check out, allows you to imagine in the dark, which is exactly the hour we are in. There is a version of Gary that most viewers carry in their heads, and it is the wrong one to start with. Set aside for a moment the running joke that Gary is secretly divine, the wise oracle who outthinks the whole town. That reading is fun, and it is everywhere. and it has been told so many times that it has stopped meaning anything. What the snail episodes actually give us is quieter and stranger. They give us a creature who understands his owner completely, and who is understood by his owner almost not at all. The gap between those two facts is where this theory lives. Begin with the dream. In Sleepy Time, which aired in January of the year 2000, SpongeBob drifts from one sleeper's mind to the next, and when his dream crosses into Gary's, the episode shows us something it never lets us see while everyone is awake. Dream Gary stands upright in a humanoid body. He speaks fluent English and owns a large personal library, rows upon rows of books lining the walls, the private collection of someone who reads. He tells SpongeBob, in effect, that a dream is a window into another world, and then he sets about proving it. He cites Emily Dickinson to back the claim, and then he recites limericks, and only after that does SpongeBob wander off into Patrick's dream instead. Consider how much is packed into that brief visit. The others' dreams are broad and silly. Gary's dream is furnished, literate, and calm. And here is the detail worth holding on to. The talking Gary of this episode is not voiced by Tom Kenny, the man who supplies Gary's ordinary meows. He is voiced by D. Bradley Baker, a different performer entirely. Think about what that means at the level of craft. Rather than let the usual meow actor read some words, the series brought in a separate voice to play the inner Gary, as though the mind behind the shell were a different being than the one we hear at the food bowl. The dream is a window, he says, and the window opens onto a person who has been there the whole time. Now hold that image against The Great Snail Race from January of 2003. Here Gary is trained for a competition, and SpongeBob coaches him in full, confident, instructional sentences. He says, in effect, "All right, Gary, let us start with some sprints," and he keeps talking that way through the whole exercise, laying out drills and expectations as if to a student who follows every word. And Gary's reply is a soft meow, just one of several he offers to SpongeBob across the episode. That is all. Yet SpongeBob never once behaves as though communication has failed. He proceeds exactly as if Gary has heard, understood, and agreed. The remarkable thing is that the episode does not treat this as a misunderstanding. It treats it as a working relationship. One party speaks in paragraphs, the other in a single syllable, and the training goes on. If you place the dream beside the race, a pattern begins to show itself. The comprehension in this household flows in one direction. Gary understands SpongeBob. SpongeBob does not understand Gary. He fills the silence with his own certainty and calls it agreement. Have you seen this snail? From November of 2005, tests that arrangement by removing SpongeBob from it. SpongeBob neglects to feed Gary, and Gary does not wait to be noticed. He leaves home on his own, without help, without a plan handed to him by anyone. Out in downtown Bikini Bottom, he survives by himself. And when the separation finally ends, notice who does the work of ending it. Gary is not tracked down and carried home like a lost pet. Gary is the one who finds his way back to SpongeBob. The competence that the show usually hides behind a meow is here made plain by circumstance. Take away the caretaker, and the snail does not fall apart. He navigates a city and returns. There is a temptation, watching these, to say the snail episodes prove Gary is simply smarter, and to leave it there. But the smarter reading misses the sadder and more interesting one. Intelligence is not really the question. The question is translation. Gary spends his life on the receiving end of a language he plainly parses, answering in a form his owner cannot parse back. And on the rare occasions the series hands him our language, the results complicate any easy notion of a gentle genius. That is the value of Chatterbox Gary. From February of 2018, 18 years after the dream. SpongeBob buys Gary a translation collar from a magazine, a device that lets Gary speak in full sentences on screen for the first time. And what does Gary do with the gift of speech? He does not deliver wisdom. Instead, he starts naming people, assigning nicknames to everyone around him at once. SpongeBob becomes Papa Bob. Patrick becomes Stinky Man. Sandy becomes Hairy Astronaut Lady. Squidward becomes Grouchy Man. And he belittles Squidward's artwork on top of it. This is not the serene reader of Emily Dickinson. This is a mind that has been watching everyone for years, forming opinions, and waiting. Put the two speaking Garys side by side, because the series is careful to keep them distinct. The dream Gary is contemplative, bookish, given to poetry, voiced by one actor in a world SpongeBob merely passes through. The caller Gary is sharp, observational, a little cruel, arriving in the waking world where consequences are real. What both versions share is that the intelligence was never in doubt. The only thing that ever changed was whether we could hear it. Gary in the dream cites a poet. Gary in the caller christens Squidward grouchy man. Neither is a creature who needs SpongeBob to think for him. So the ordinary scenes read differently once you have seen the extraordinary ones. When SpongeBob talks to Gary as though Gary understands, the joke is not that he is foolishly projecting onto a dumb animal. The joke, if it is one, runs the other way. Gary does understand. He has always understood. He has a library he never mentions, a life he can conduct alone, and a full set of names for the people who assume he is only a pet. The silence was never absence. It was the one thing about him that stayed private. Consider Plankton not as a villain, but as a man who lost one fight and never recovered from it. The show gives us the origin plainly enough in the Season 5 opener called Friend or Foe, which first aired in 2007. A flashback there reveals something that reframes everything we thought we understood about the rivalry across the street. Mr. Krabs and Plankton were not always enemies. As children they were best friends, and the two of them were bullied together by another child, which is to say, they began on the same side of a cruelty, the small ones against the larger world. The same flashback shows them running a burger stand together as boys. Two partners, one stand, a shared enterprise. During a fight over the recipe, ingredients fell by accident into the batter, and out of that accident came the formula for the Krabby Patty. Notice how the show frames the discovery. It was not genius. It was not Krabs alone, in a moment of inspiration. It was a spill, an argument, two friends grabbing at the same bowl. And then the story turns on a single physical fact. As the two struggled over the paper recipe, it simply tore in half between them, and it was the ingredients spilled by accident into the batter, not any contest of strength, that left Krabs holding the winning formula. That is the whole hinge of it. Not a fair sale of any kind, size. The bigger one took the thing they had made together, and the smaller one was left holding nothing but the memory of having helped make it. If you dwell on it, the entire empire of the Krusty Krab rests on a theft that succeeded only because one party could not stop it. The recipe was joint property, born of a shared kitchen, and it became sole property through force. Everything Mr. Krabs later built, the restaurant, the wealth, the town's affection, grew from a moment when he was stronger than his friend and used it. Plankton is not chasing something he never had. He is trying to reclaim something that was half his to begin with. Now follow what he does with that loss. In 1999, in the episode simply called Plankton, which first aired on the last day of July, the episode introduced both the Chum Bucket and Karen, the computer who runs it and lives in it with him. The Chum Bucket sits directly across the street from the Krusty Krab. Think about the geography of that. He did not move away, did not open somewhere new, and forget the whole business. He built his own restaurant within sight of the one that took his recipe, and there he stays, watching the customers file past his door and into his old partners. The reference material for the series describes the Chum Bucket as consistently failing to attract customers because its food cannot compete with the Krusty Krabs. So the daily condition of his life is this: he can see, at all hours, the exact thing he lost, thriving, while the thing he built starves. That is a portrait of a small business crushed by a monopoly, and the show never lets him win his way out of it. There is a detail that quietly measures the length of his suffering. In the Season 3 episode Plankton's Army, the story tells us it is the 25th anniversary of Plankton's very first attempt to steal the formula. A quarter century of trying, of failing, of waking up across the street and trying again. Most stories give a villain a plan and a climax. This one gives him decades of continuous defeat, marked and dated inside the series itself. In that same episode, he recruits his entire extended family, millions of Plankton relatives, to raid the Krusty Krab and open the safe. It is the largest effort he has ever mounted, everything he has, every relation he can summon, and it fails, because Mr. Krabs had already planted a decoy formula, ground plankton listed as the secret ingredient. Even the full invasion of his own bloodline cannot buy him one real victory. The insult folded into that decoy is worth pausing on. The false recipe names his own kind as the thing to be ground up and cooked. His family storms the building to be told, in effect, that they are the filler. The pattern holds across the schemes. In Imitation Krabs, which first aired in January of 2001, Plankton builds a robotic double of Mr. Krabs, a whole mechanical copy of his old friend, to trick SpongeBob into revealing the formula. Look at what the effort costs him and how it ends. The scheme collapses when SpongeBob, without understanding what he is doing, triggers the robot's own coin-operated self-destruct mechanism, a coin slot. Even the machine Plankton built to imitate a wealthy crab is undone by money, by the mechanism of a coin, which is the very thing Krabs has, and Plankton does not. His inventions are ingenious, and they defeat themselves on the details, and he is left again exactly where he started, across the street, watching. There is a real-world layer that deepens all of this, and it comes from the man who gives Plankton his voice. Plankton is voiced by Mr. Lawrence, whose full name is Doug Lawrence, and by most accounts he is credited with writing more episodes of SpongeBob SquarePants than anyone else on the show, a striking share of the total. So the character who cannot win is voiced and largely shaped by one of the busiest hands behind the entire series. The person who understands the series most thoroughly chose to pour that understanding into the one who always loses. That is not an accident of casting. It is a decision about where its deepest attention lives. In interviews given around the release of Plankton the movie, Lawrence has said something that seems to gently confirm the reading. He said that Plankton's frustrations are relatable to everyone, even though his aspirations to rule the world are not. Sit inside that sentence for a moment. The world domination is the costume, the cartoon exterior. The frustration underneath is the part that belongs to all of us. The wanting, the trying, the failing, the being smaller than the things standing in your way. Lawrence separated the two on purpose, the ridiculous ambition from the human ache, and told us which one is the true center. He noted one more thing in that interview that sets Plankton apart from every other figure in Bikini Bottom. Plankton is the only main character on the show who is married, which gives him a comparatively grounded home life. Everyone else, the fry cook, the crab, the neighbor, the friends, lives essentially alone. Plankton goes home to Karen. Whatever else the chum bucket is, it is also a household, a shared life, the one domestic partnership among the leads. So the character the series treats as its schemer and its punchline is also, structurally, the most adult of them all. He runs a failing business. He is married. He goes home each night to the same place, having lost again, and gets up the next day to open the doors of a restaurant no one enters. That is the shape of him, if you take the facts as they are given. A childhood friend who was overpowered, a partner written out of the partnership by force, a small owner who set up shop across from the giant that took his recipe and has been losing to it for 25 years and more. His plans are inventive and his defeats are total, and the person who wrote more of this world than anyone made sure we could see, underneath the schemes, a frustration we already know. Not evil, exactly. Something quieter and more familiar than evil. A man who helped build the thing and was too small to hold on to it and could not bring himself to leave. In the third season there is an episode called Nasty Patty, and it opens the way many schemes at the Krusty Krab open, with Mr. Krabs deciding that a threat has arrived and that the threat must be answered. A man walks in whom he and SpongeBob believe to be a fake health inspector, an imposter, and rather than turn him away or simply cook an honest meal, the two of them set about building a burger designed to sicken. They reach for volcano sauce, they add seahorse radish, they fold in toenail clippings. Watch how carefully the ingredients are chosen, how the cruelty is not a lapse of temper but a recipe, something planned and assembled with attention. There is a kind of craftsmanship here, and that is the first quiet unease of the episode, because craftsmanship implies pride, and pride implies that the maker has thought about what he is doing and approves of it. The escalation does not stop at the ingredients. Before the patty is served, SpongeBob drops it in a toilet, and Mr. Krabs, undeterred, dries it off using his own dirty gym socks. Think about the small domestic detail of that. The socks are his. The gym is his. The willingness to press something that has been in a toilet against fabric that has been against his own body, and then to plate it and carry it out to a paying customer, tells you that the ordinary human reflex of disgust has been switched off in service of the plan. He is not repulsed. He is efficient. And the episode, to its credit, does not soften this. It lets you sit with the length to which he will go when he has decided that someone deserves it. Then the man eats, and the man chokes, and the man collapses, and the man goes silent. And here the theory this chapter concerns itself with finds its clearest single moment. Because Mr. Krabs, faced with a body that has just gone still at his own table, does not check whether the man is breathing. He does not call for help. His first reaction, the very first thing to leave his mouth, is the line, "We've got to get rid of this body before anyone sees it. We've got to take it out and bury it." Consider the ordering of his instincts. A person appears to have died in front of him, and the impulse that arrives first, ahead of alarm, ahead of pity, ahead of any wish to save him, is concealment. The body is a problem to be buried, not a life to be checked. That is the exact detail the theory rests on, and it is worth slowing down over, because it is not a joke the cartoon tosses away. It is the emotional center of the episode. He then swears SpongeBob to secrecy. He tells him, "No one, and I mean no one, can ever know about this." Notice that the fear in that sentence is not grief and not guilt in any moral sense. It is exposure. The worry is that the death will be seen, that it will be traced, that it will attach itself to him and to the restaurant. A man capable of feeling the weight of having possibly killed someone would be undone by it. This man is instead organizing a cover-up before the body has cooled. The distance between those two responses is the whole of the argument. Then the episode delivers its final turn, the one that converts a dark gag into something genuinely damning. The man who collapsed was not the imposter at all. He was the real, legitimate health inspector, and the actual fraud, the fake they had been so afraid of, is revealed to have been arrested somewhere else entirely. Which means the elaborate poisoning, the toilet, the socks, the buried instinct to bury a body, were all aimed at an innocent official simply doing his job. Worse than going too far, the scheme was pointed at the wrong target from the beginning, and the wrongness of the target strips away any last excuse of self-defense. There was no enemy. There was only a working man who ate what he was served. This is the scene that the comics website CBR built an entire piece around, an article carrying the blunt title, SpongeBob SquarePants Theory, Mr. Krabs is a Serial Killer. The body disposal moment reads like the kind of scene such a piece would treat as its central exhibit, taken as evidence of a lack of empathy and a general disregard for people's welfare. That phrasing is careful and, I think, accurate. It does not accuse him of hatred. Hatred would at least be a feeling directed at a person. What the scene shows is closer to absence, a place where concern for another life is supposed to be, and simply is not. And into that empty place rushes the practical question of how to make the problem disappear. The same CBR piece reaches for a second episode to strengthen the pattern, one called Out of the Picture, in which Mr. Krabs attempts to kill Squidward with a mallet. His reasoning is that Squidward's art will be worth more after his death, and so the killing is, in his mind, an investment. This is not the toilet patty aimed at a stranger he fears. This is violence aimed at an employee he sees every day, and the motive is nakedly financial. Put the two episodes beside each other, and the shape becomes hard to unsee. When money enters the equation, the lives around him lose their weight. They become obstacles, or they become assets, but they stop being people whose survival matters for its own sake. If Nasty Patty and Out of the Picture show the psychopathy through violence, the fourth season episode, Selling Out, shows the same emptiness through commerce. And it may be the more revealing of the two, because no one is poisoned and no mallet is raised. A buyer named Howard Blandy wants the Krusty Krab. Mr. Krabs, playing the part of a man of principle, tells him it would take more than a suitcase of cash to sell the place. It is a fine speech, the kind that lets a person believe there are things they will not do. And then Blandy shows him a boat full of suitcases, each one stuffed with money, and the principle evaporates on the spot. He agrees instantly. The distance between more than a suitcase and yes turns out to be nothing more than the number of suitcases. There was never a line. There was only a price he had not yet been offered. Look closely at what the contract actually transfers, because the show is specific, and the specificity matters. The document sells the Krusty Krab and all proprietary ownership thereof, along with its employees, merchandise, logos, and cash registers. Read that list again, and find the word employees sitting there between the merchandise and the logos. SpongeBob and the rest of the staff are not mentioned as people who work at a place being sold. They are itemized as property being sold along with it, cataloged in the same breath as the signage and the registers. Mr. Krabs signs this. He reads no objection into it. To him the sentence is simply true, because that is what his workers have always been to him, line items in an inventory. And the way he leaves them confirms it. There is no gathering and no explanation, nothing offered to soften what he has done to the fry cook who has given him years of unpaid devotion. He shows no concern at all for how the sale lands on SpongeBob. He offers only a curt, "So long, boys," and walks away wealthy. 3 words for the people he has just sold. Think about what it would take to say goodbye that lightly to someone who worshipped you, and you begin to understand what the 7 deadly sins reading is pointing at. That reading comes from Screen Rant, in an article proposing that the characters of the cartoon each embody one of the 7 deadly sins, and its casting of Mr. Krabs is the one nobody argues with. He is greed. Wikipedia's own page on SpongeBob fan theories records this framing, the claim that among all these figures he is the pure and undiluted form of the wish to have more, and selling out is greed's most complete portrait, because it does not stop at the sale. What happens after is the part that turns the diagnosis from cruelty towards something sadder and stranger. The Krusty Krab is converted into a corporate franchise called Krabby Mondays, its food replaced by processed, spray-painted fake patties, everything honest about the place scrubbed out and replaced with a brand. And Mr. Krabs, watching this, does something that should be impossible for a man who just sold his life's work for a boat of cash. He buys the restaurant back, at full price. He spends the entire fortune he had just gained, undoing the very sale he had been so eager to make. The money that was the whole point turns out to have been worthless to him the moment he had it, and he trades all of it away to return to exactly where he started. Why? The episode answers in a single line, delivered in retirement, when he grows bored and unfulfilled within a single morning of having everything he supposedly wanted. He says, "I've done everything I wanted to do, and it's not even noon." Sit with the smallness of that. A whole life's ambition, satisfied and exhausted before lunch. The fortune did not fill him, because the fortune was never the thing he was chasing. It was the chasing itself, the accumulation, the having of more. And once the wanting had nowhere left to go, he was hollow by mid-morning. That is the loneliness underneath the greed, and it is why the psychopath reading and the sin reading are really describing the same wound from 2 sides. The inability to value people and the inability to be satisfied by wealth are the same absence wearing different clothes. So the theory this chapter has followed does not depend on a single scene, and that is its strength. It draws a line from the buried body in Nasty Patty to the mallet in Out of the Picture, to the itemized employees and the 3-word farewell in Selling Out, and along that line it finds a consistent figure. A man for whom other lives register only as costs or assets. A man whose first instinct before a possible corpse is concealment, whose principles dissolve at the sight of enough suitcases, who sells the people who love him without a backward glance, and then discovers that the money he sold them for cannot warm a single morning. I offer this as reading rather than as fact, because the show is a comedy and means most of it is comedy. But the pieces are all there, laid out by the writers themselves, and once you have seen the pattern, it is difficult to watch him count his coins the same way again. There is a moment in One Krab's Trash, an episode nominally about a soda-drinking hat and a fictional grave, when the plot forgets itself for a second and shows you something it did not need to show. Mr. Krabs is prowling the cemetery, hunting for the resting place of a made-up man with an unpronounceable name, and in the middle of that errand, he comes across Squidward. Squidward is weeping over a grave. The episode does not explain whose grave it is. It does not tell you why he is there, at night, alone, among the dead, while the town he lives in goes on being loud and yellow and cheerful without him. The gag moves on, but the image stays, and if you slow it down, it becomes one of the quietest and strangest things the series ever put on screen. A grown squid, off the clock, grieving something the story will never name. Weigh that as an introduction to a character. Most of Bikini Bottom is drawn without an inner life you can hurt. Squidward is the exception. He is the one the show keeps catching in private, at the exact instant a private feeling would rather not be caught, and that habit of catching him is the whole psychology of the character. Fans have described Squidward as something close to an animated voice of despair, a kind of existential desperation, given a nose and a clarinet, and his voice actor, Roger Bumpass, seems to see him the same way. That is a large claim to make about a cartoon. This chapter is going to take it seriously, because the episodes about his art and his music make the case better than any interview could. Consider Artist Unknown, which aired in the series' second season alongside Sailor Mouth. Squidward teaches a night art class at the Bikini Bottom Adult Learning Center, and the premise is already a small tragedy before anything goes wrong. This is a man who wants to be recognized as an artist, reduced to teaching strangers in the evening, in a building for adults catching up on the things life did not give them the first time. Then the room empties. The prospective students realize they have wandered into the wrong course, that they came for the cooking class and not for this, and they leave. What remains is SpongeBob, his sole pupil, the one person who would have stayed for anything. Picture the geometry of that room, an audience assembled and an audience departing, and the departure having nothing to do with the quality of what was offered. They did not reject his art. They were never there for it. That distinction is crueler than rejection, and the show lets it sit. The episode then delivers its sharpest idea. Squidward attempts a marble sculpture, a real work, a serious ambition, and it collapses. His careful effort crumples and falls into a heap of rubble, and the rubble is mistaken for a masterpiece. It is placed on public display in the park, admired, labeled with the words, "Artist Unknown," and when a genuine art collector arrives and shows interest, Squidward denies any connection to it. Sit with the shape of that. The one time the world calls his work brilliant, it is calling his failure brilliant, and it does not know his name. He could step forward and claim it. He does not. To claim the ruin would be to admit that his best and his worst are indistinguishable to everyone but him, that the difference he has staked his identity on cannot be seen from the outside. So he lets the accident keep the credit and walks away anonymous. A man refusing his own success because the success is a joke he is not in on. The pattern has a name, if you want one, and it is comparison. Squidward almost never suffers in isolation. He suffers next to someone. Band Geeks, the segment that aired on Nickelodeon on the 7th of September 2001, is built entirely out of a single comparison, and it names it. Squidward assembles a marching band for one reason, which is to outperform Squilliam Fancyson, a former classmate from high school, who went on to succeed professionally in music where Squidward did not. Everything Squidward reaches for is measured against a person who already has it. Squilliam is not a villain. He is worse than a villain. He is the version of Squidward that the world rewarded, the proof that the talent Squidward believes he possesses was possible to convert into a life, and that someone he sat beside as a young squid managed the conversion while he did not. The band has nothing to do with music. It is about that one boy, decades later, still winning. Here is where the real world did something the writers could not have scripted. Band Geeks ends with a song, Sweet Victory, a swelling anthem of triumph earned against expectation, and for years it lived only as a cartoon crescendo. Then, Steven Hillenburg, the show's creator, died in 2018, and an online petition asked the National Football League to play Sweet Victory at the Super Bowl 53 halftime show. It surpassed 1 million signatures. 1 million people wanted Squidward's moment of victory to become real, to be sung in a stadium. And at Super Bowl 53, in February of 2019, the league did not perform it in full. A few seconds of the song were used, folded into a video clip that introduced a different artist's performance, a lead-in to another man's song. Read that back through the character. The one triumph the fictional squid ever fully earned was, in reality, cut down to a few seconds and used to introduce somebody more famous. Even in tribute, Squidward got the Squidward ending. His victory arrived as an opening act for someone else. If the art episodes are about failed dreams, and the music episodes are about comparison, then Squidville is about the third wall of the same prison, which is the fantasy of escape. Paired with Grandma's Kisses in Season 2, it grants Squidward exactly what he claims to want. He relocates to Tentacle Acres, a gated community advertised for residents desperate to get away from neighbors like SpongeBob and Patrick. A place where every single squid looks like him, dresses like him, and behaves like him. This is the dream stated plainly. No yellow sponge, no pink starfish, no interruption, only refined company that shares his tastes and his temperament. And he is bored almost immediately. Surrounded by perfect copies of himself, he begins to act like SpongeBob and Patrick, the very creatures he fled, until the conformist squids form an angry mob and chase him out. Follow that carefully, because it is the most quietly devastating thing the show ever said about him. Given a world made entirely of Squidward, Squidward cannot stand it. The thing he thought he wanted, other people who are just like him, turns out to be unbearable, and the only way he can feel alive in it is to import the chaos he spent the whole episode escaping. His misery, it seems, is not caused by SpongeBob. His misery would follow him into paradise, and it does. Which brings the comparison back around to that window in Grandma's Kisses. At the close of that episode, after SpongeBob has a tearful reconciliation with his grandmother, Squidward and the Krusty Krab customers are shown watching secretly through the glass, and they burst into mocking laughter. It is easy to read that as simple cruelty. Read it instead as distance. Squidward is, once again, on the outside of a window, looking in at a moment of uncomplicated love and belonging, and the only tool he has for the ache of being outside it is contempt. The laughter is a wall he builds in real time so that the tenderness on the other side of the glass cannot reach him and remind him of what he does not have. He is the man in the cemetery again, watching life happen to other people, converting his exclusion into a joke before it can become grief. Bumpass, promoting the prequel series Camp Coral, said the show sets out to reveal how Squidward got to be so depressed, frustrated, and underappreciated, and he described the mechanism precisely. The character, he said, gets knocked down sequentially, one blow after another, until he settles into the sourpuss the main series knows. Sequentially is the important word. Not one catastrophe, but a long accumulation of small ones. The students who wanted the cooking class, the classmate who made it, the sculpture that only succeeded as rubble, the anthem cut to a few seconds, the paradise that turned into a mob. No single disaster, just an unbroken series of near misses and mismeasurements, each one small enough to laugh off and heavy enough to stay. There is a reason this lands harder the older you get, which Bumpass also named. He has observed viewers move their identification from SpongeBob to Squidward as they grow into adulthood and its responsibilities. The child watches and roots for the sponge, the one who loves his job and cannot be discouraged. The adult watches and finds, waiting there the whole time, the neighbor who wanted to be an artist and is instead flipping patties, who dreamed of being applauded and is instead teaching a night class to an empty room, who fled to a perfect community and could not breathe in it. You do not choose to start seeing yourself in Squidward. It happens to you, quietly, the way most of what happens to him happens to him. He was drawn as the joke. He becomes, at a certain age, the one character in the water who is telling the truth. Consider a counter theory, one that does not get told very often, because it asks you to distrust the one figure in Bikini Bottom you can always count on. The theory is simple to state and difficult to shake once you have heard it. What if Patrick Star is not stupid at all? What if the stupidity is a performance, a costume worn so completely and for so long that even his closest friend has never seen underneath it? Most of the series gives you no reason to think this. And then, in scattered episodes across the years, the show hands you a piece of evidence that does not fit, and leaves it lying there, and moves on as if nothing happened. Begin with the piece that is hardest to explain away. In Driven to Tears, which aired in February of 2007, SpongeBob fails Mrs. Puff's boating test for the 58th time. 58. That number is meant to be a joke about SpongeBob, about the bottomless futility of his driving. But watch what the episode does next. Patrick takes the same test, and Patrick passes it, with a perfect score, on his very first attempt. Follow that through if you take it seriously, rather than as a punchline. The character the cartoon has trained you to read as the dumber of the two, the one who lives under a rock, walks into the single institution that has defeated SpongeBob dozens upon dozens of times, and clears it flawlessly, without study, without practice, without a second try. If you believe Patrick is a fool, this is impossible. If you believe the foolishness is a mask, it is exactly what you would expect the mask to occasionally slip and reveal. There is a gentler kind of evidence, and it lives in the secret box, from 2001. For an entire episode, Patrick keeps the contents of a box hidden from SpongeBob. And SpongeBob, who is not a lazy schemer, tries trick after trick to spy on it or to take it. Every attempt fails. Patrick outlasts him at every turn. Now, patience and secrecy are not the same thing as intelligence, and a stubborn simpleton can guard a box out of pure obstinance. But the box itself argues otherwise. It contains a hidden second compartment, a chamber opened by pulling an attached string, and inside that concealed space is an embarrassing photograph of SpongeBob from a Christmas party. Sit with the design of that object, a false interior, a mechanism, a string that a person would have to plan and build and hide. Patrick made this. Patrick engineered a container with a secret it would take deliberate thought to construct, and he kept both the box and the trick of the box from his best friend for the length of the story. That is not the behavior of a mind that cannot hold a thought. That is craft. Then there is the episode that seems, on its surface, to argue against the theory, and which I think secretly argues for it. In Patrick SmartPants, from October of 2005, SpongeBob accidentally attaches a piece of brain coral to Patrick's head, and Patrick becomes, temporarily, highly intelligent. He critiques Squidward's clarinet playing. He engages Sandy in advanced mathematics. The easy reading is that the coral is a magic upgrade, that intelligence was poured into an empty vessel from the outside. But notice what happens at the very end. Patrick, still in this altered state, reasons on his own that the object attached to his head cannot actually be his real head fragment, and he uses that deduction to go and locate his true head at Jellyfish Fields. The deduction is the thing to hold on to. Whatever the coral did, the final act of reasoning is Patrick reasoning about Patrick, turning a sharp mind back on his own condition and drawing the correct conclusion. A vessel does not examine itself. The episode wants you to laugh at the idea of a smart Patrick, and in doing so it shows you, for a few minutes, what a smart Patrick would sound like, and it is not so far from the ordinary one after all. Small facts accumulate in the background, easy to miss. In The Bully, from 2002, the episode mentions in passing that Patrick attended community college, where he was once friends with the episode's antagonist, Flats the Flounder. It is a throwaway line. It is also a biographical fact the writers chose to give him rather than to withhold. A character built purely as an idiot does not need a history of higher education, however modest. That detail sits in the record now, and the counter theory picks it up and asks why it is there at all. But the strongest support for the idea that the stupidity is deliberate comes from an episode where Patrick's own strategy is the entire plot. In I'm with Stupid, which aired in October of 2001, Patrick's parents are coming to visit, and Patrick is afraid they will think he is not smart. So he and SpongeBob hatch a plan. They will stage SpongeBob as an idiot, an exaggerated performance of stupidity, so that Patrick will appear the smarter of the two by comparison in front of his mother and father. Read that again with the counter theory in mind. Patrick understands, well enough to weaponize it, that intelligence is relative, that a person can be made to look clever by controlling who stands next to them. He designs a social performance. He directs his friend to play dumb on purpose. This is a character consciously manufacturing an impression of his own mind. And the plan works, in its way. His parents conclude, by the end, that their son must have coached SpongeBob into basic skills, into speaking in complete sentences and doing arithmetic, and they credit Patrick with more intelligence than they had expected. Whether or not that is true inside the story, the crucial point is the shape of the whole episode. Patrick knows what it is to fake a level of intelligence, because faking it is the plan he authors himself. The series gives him, for one half of one episode, complete command over the very illusion the counter theory says he maintains all the time. I want to be careful here, because a good theory should know its own weaknesses. None of these episodes says, in dialogue, that Patrick is secretly a genius wearing a disguise. The show never confirms it. Every one of these moments can be read as an isolated joke, a one-off gag that the writers reached for because it was funny that week and then forgot. That is the honest counter to the counter theory, and it is probably the truer account of how the series was actually made. The competence is not a plan the writers laid down across seasons. It is a series of accidents that a patient viewer can string into a shape, but the shape is real once you have strung it, and it does not come apart when you tug on it. That is what makes it worth a night's slow attention. There is one more thread, and it comes from outside the animation entirely, from the man who has spoken for Patrick since the very beginning. Bill Fagerbakke has voiced Patrick Star since the series started in 1999, more than 25 years now in the one role. And Fagerbakke has reportedly said, of his own long working life, that he has spent most of it playing characters of, in his word, questionable intelligence. And he is said to have described finding in Patrick, over those 25 years, many different shades. Hold on to that phrase. Many different shades. It is the language of an actor who does not think he is playing one flat note. A dumb character has one shade. A character an actor keeps discovering new colors in, decade after decade, is something more layered than the surface suggests, whether or not the scripts ever admit it. The performance itself contains the ambiguity that the theory is reaching for. So the counter-theory does not need to be true to be valuable. It only needs to make you watch more carefully. The next time Patrick says something that lands as pure foolishness, the theory asks a quiet question underneath it. Is he not understanding, or is he choosing not to? On the 58th failed test, and the first perfect one, on the box with the string inside it, on the deduction at Jellyfish Fields, the community college, the parents he coached his friend to fool, the evidence never adds up to a verdict. It adds up to a doubt, and the doubt is enough to keep you looking, which is the gentlest thing a theory can do, and a fine thing to hold in your mind as you drift. There is a single episode of this show whose title is not a title at all. It is a code, SB-129. Every other segment across the series carries a descriptive name, some small promise of what you are about to watch, and this one refuses that entirely. It offers you only its production number, a code whose exact meaning fans have never quite agreed on, as though the crew never got around to naming it and the label simply stuck. The episode is credited to Aaron Springer and Eric Wiese as writers and storyboard artists, and some who track the crew credits note it as an unusual shift in Springer's role, a small footnote buried inside an episode about time coming loose from its hinges. That the single strangest episode in the series, temporally speaking, wears a serial number instead of a name feels, in hindsight, almost too fitting. The setup is ordinary enough. Squidward, trying to escape yet another invitation to go jellyfishing with SpongeBob and Patrick, hides inside the Krusty Krab's walk-in freezer. The door closes, and then the ordinary stops. He does not wait an afternoon, or a night, or a season. He is frozen for 2,000 years. When he finally thaws and stumbles out into the restaurant, the space around him has changed into something sleek and unfamiliar, and on the wall there hangs a calendar. The calendar reads March the 6th, 4017. Hold on that number for a moment, because it is the small hinge on which an enormous amount of fan theorizing turns. If the far future is the year 4017, and that icy sleep lasted 2,000 years, then the arithmetic all but insists that the episode's present day, the ordinary Bikini Bottom he left behind when the freezer door shut, is the year 2017. The show is telling you, almost in passing, what year it thinks it is. Now consider when you were actually watching this. SB-129 first aired on the last day of the last year of the old century, December the 31st, 1999. So the episode that aired in 1999 placed its own present day, roughly 18 years, into its own future. A calendar drawn in the final hours of the 20th century, pointing forward past the turn of the millennium, past a stretch of real years the writers could not have lived through yet, to settle on a date that would not arrive in the real world for nearly 2 decades. Notice what that does. In setting that scene in the future, the episode effectively dated its own baseline reality to a moment that, for its first audience, had not happened yet. This is the small crack that fans pry open. The date is never spoken aloud, or treated as important by the episode itself. It is a background prop, a piece of set dressing, meant only to sell the idea that a very long time has passed. But because it can be read, and because the 2,000-year gap makes the math legible, it becomes evidence. It becomes something to reconcile. And once you accept that this show is willing to put a specific year on the wall, you have to decide what to do with it, because the rest of the series does not obviously agree. There is, for instance, a long-running piece of fan speculation cataloged on the Wiki of Guesses that tries to argue the series is actually set in the 1970s or 1980s. Its central piece of evidence comes from the 2004 film, where SpongeBob says he has been named Employee of the Month for 374 consecutive months. 374 months is a little over 31 years of unbroken employment, which pushes the imagined founding of that restaurant and the imagined start of his working life back decades before the show ever aired. If you take that line at face value, Bikini Bottom sits somewhere in the deep late 20th century, and the people building that theory know exactly what stands in their way. They name it directly. The 2017 date from SB 129 is flagged, inside their own theory, as the contradiction they have to explain away. One number says the 70s, another number, drawn years earlier, says 2017. Both are in the same fictional world, and both cannot be simply true at once. What is genuinely wonderful about this is that the series never asked to be pinned down. Cartoons are usually allowed to float in a soft, undated present, a permanent Tuesday afternoon that never accumulates into a real calendar. Most of the series is happy to live there, but SB 129 reached into that soft present and stamped a year on it. And once a year exists, everything else has to arrange itself around that year, whether the later writers intended it or not. A single frozen prop turned an unfalsifiable world into one that fans could argue about with actual arithmetic. This is not a flaw the writers agonized over. It is a byproduct, an accident of set design that the audience refused to let go. The episode is not finished complicating things, either. Because after the future, Squidward keeps traveling. In that gleaming restaurant he is revived by Spongetron and Patron, robotic descendants of SpongeBob and Patrick, the far future inheritors of the same two personalities that tormented him with a jellyfishing net. Then he finds a time machine and, instead of going home, overshoots in the other direction, backward past his own era entirely, down into a primordial sea. There he meets primate sponge and prehistoric starfish, the ancient ancestors of the same two friends. So within one episode it gives you both ends of a lineage. It shows you the robotic future descendants and the primitive past ancestors of SpongeBob and Patrick, and it plants Squidward, unchanged, at both ends of the timeline like a fixed point the centuries flow around. The primordial scene is where the real paradox closes. The two ancient creatures turn to Squidward and ask, in effect, whether he is ready to go jellyfishing. It is the exact invitation he spent the whole episode fleeing, waiting for him at the dawn of the species. Baffled, he asks who could possibly have invented such a foolish game, and they tell him, in effect, that he did. He invented it. He is the one who taught jellyfishing to the ancestors of the very friends whose jellyfishing invitation drove him into the freezer in the first place. Sit with the shape of that, because it is a genuine bootstrap paradox, the kind usually reserved for serious time travel fiction. Jellyfishing has no origin. Squidward learns of it from SpongeBob and Patrick in the present, flees it into the freezer, waits out 2 millennia in the ice, travels back to the primordial past, and there teaches it to their ancestors, who pass it down through the generations until it reaches SpongeBob and Patrick, who offer it back to him. The knowledge exists in a closed loop with no first inventor. It was never created by anyone. It simply circulates, handed from the future back into the past and forward again. A game that taught itself to exist. The one thing Squidward wanted to escape turns out to be the one thing he is personally, causally responsible for having planted at the root of all time. So the episode leaves you with 2 different kinds of temporal trouble stacked on top of each other, and this is why it feeds so many obscure timeline theories at once. On one level, there is the small, quiet, almost administrative contradiction of the calendar, a single date that fixes the series in 2017 and forces every other stray reference, the 31 years of Employee of the Month plaques, the soft, undated present of every other episode, into some uneasy negotiation with that number. On another level, there is the grand, deliberate, self-consuming loop of the jellyfishing paradox, a story that folds its own beginning into its own end. One is an accident the fans weaponized, the other is a paradox the writers built on purpose. And they both live inside the only episode brave enough, or indifferent enough, to go by a production code instead of a name. There is a moment in Frankendoodle, the second season episode that first aired in January of 2002, that most people forget almost as soon as they see it. Before SpongeBob, before Patrick, before any of the mischief that follows, the show opens on something it almost never shows, a live-action human being. An artist sits in a rowboat on the surface of the real ocean, sketching, and by accident, he lets his pencil slip from his fingers. It falls through the water and sinks, coming to rest in Bikini Bottom, on the seafloor, in the animated world below. The pencil's human origin is established on screen, plainly, before either sponge or starfish ever lays a hand on it. Think about what the episode is quietly telling you in those first seconds. This object does not belong here. It has fallen from one order of reality into another. That framing matters, because everything that comes afterward is usually remembered as a monster episode, and it is one. But underneath the chase and the slapstick, there is a stranger idea, and the episode is careful enough to name it out loud at the very end. What Frankendoodle is really about is the meeting of two dimensions, and what happens when a tool from one of them is loose inside the other. SpongeBob and Patrick discover that the pencil brings anything drawn with it to life. Whatever the graphite touches into being, breathes. And SpongeBob, being SpongeBob, uses this power for something small and petty. He sketches a duplicate of himself to prank Squidward. He names the drawing DoodleBob. This is the detail worth slowing down on, because of how DoodleBob looks. He is not rendered the way SpongeBob is rendered. He is a flat, hand-inked line drawing, a two-dimensional sketch of a sponge, with wobbling outlines and a face that never quite holds still. In a world where every character is a solid, three-dimensional model, with weight and shading and a consistent shape, DoodleBob is the single figure who is visibly made of lines. He is a drawing that knows it is a drawing, walking around among things that do not. That visual choice is the whole theory in a single image. Bikini Bottom is a rendered world. DoodleBob is a sketched one. And when the two occupy the same frame, you can see the seam between them. He is not a citizen of this place who happens to look odd. He is a piece of a different kind of reality, a flatter and simpler order of existence that has been pulled across the boundary and made to stand inside a world that follows other rules. He behaves like it too. DoodleBob never speaks in coherent English, not in this episode, and not in any appearance since. He communicates only in unintelligible gibberish, and the most famous of his sounds, the line that has followed him for more than 20 years, is the cry of "Me hoi minoi." You can read that in the obvious way, as comedy, a nonsense noise from a nonsense creature. Or you can read it the way the episode's ending invites you to. If DoodleBob comes from somewhere flatter and stranger than Bikini Bottom, then he arrives without the language of the place he has been drawn into. His speech does not translate, because his origin does not translate. He is trying to say something, and the aquatic three-dimensional world simply has no words that fit. The episode understands that DoodleBob wants to persist. After he is partly erased, the surviving arm redraws the rest of his body overnight, using the magic pencil to reassemble himself out of nothing while the town sleeps. Consider what that means. A drawing that has been reduced to a single limb reaches for the tool that made it and rebuilds itself from the outline up. It is one of the more genuinely unsettling images the cartoon ever produced, and it works precisely because it treats a sketch as something with a will to continue. During the struggle that follows, the pencil snaps in half. The instrument that let one dimension right into another is broken, and with it goes the easy passage between the two. And then the defeat, which is where the world building becomes almost elegant. DoodleBob is not beaten by strength. He steps on a loose sheet of paper, and his foot is absorbed into it. The flat creature is caught by the flattest possible surface, drawn back down into two dimensions by the very thing he is made of. SpongeBob then closes him inside a book, sealing him on one of its pages. A two-dimensional being, returned to a two-dimensional home, and shut there. It is a strangely gentle solution for a monster story. He is not destroyed, he is filed away. The closing scene is the one that turns the whole episode from a prank gone wrong into something closer to a small tragedy. SpongeBob stands looking at the framed page where DoodleBob is trapped, and he describes him to Patrick, in words the episode gives us directly, as a two-dimensional creature lost in our three-dimensional aquatic world, longing for a purpose. Linger on that sentence, because the show wrote it deliberately, and it is doing a great deal of work. The word lost tells you DoodleBob did not choose to be here. The phrase, our three-dimensional aquatic world, draws the line between the two orders of reality and places SpongeBob firmly on one side of it. And, Longing for a purpose grants the drawing an inner life, a want, a reason his gibberish might have carried feeling. In one breath, the episode reframes its antagonist as a displaced thing from another dimension who never asked to be summoned and never found a place once he arrived. Part of why that line lands the way it does may come down to who was behind it. DoodleBob is often credited to Paul Tibbitt, who was not a member of the regular voice cast. He was a writer and a storyboard director on Frankendoodle, one of the people shaping the episode from the inside rather than a performer brought in to read a part. There is something fitting about that. The character who is a drawing brought to life was given his voice by one of the people whose job was drawing. Tibbitt is said to have enjoyed returning to the role for later shorts, which suggests the affection for this odd creature ran deep among the people who made him. Because DoodleBob did return, and the returns are what let you test whether the two-dimensional idea was a one-time flourish or something the cartoon kept believing in. In the Season 11 episode Doodle Dimension, which aired in March of 2018, SpongeBob and Patrick accidentally activate a vortex machine in Sandy's house, and it opens a portal to a completely blank white dimension. Notice how directly this extends the first episode's logic. Frankendoodle imagined a flat creature crossing into our world. Doodle Dimension sends the characters the other way, through a portal, into the empty white space a drawing would come from. It is a void with nothing in it, pure, unmarked page, the raw material of any sketch before the first line is set down. Once inside that blankness, they find the same rule waiting for them. They discover they can draw objects into existence there too. The power of the pencil was never really about the pencil. It was about the meeting of a marking hand and a surface that accepts marks. And here the entire dimension is that surface. Patrick, without meaning to, redraws DoodleBob back into being. The creature who was sealed on a page is restored the moment two visitors from the rendered world start drawing inside the unrendered one. If you were building a case that DoodleBob is native to a two-dimensional realm rather than to Bikini Bottom, this is the episode that makes it for you. He is not summoned in the blank dimension so much as recovered, as though he had been there all along, waiting in the white. His second defeat keeps faith with the idea as well. DoodleBob is beaten when SpongeBob and Patrick cut the string of a hand-drawn balloon, sending him floating away into the void of the blank dimension, drifting off alongside miniature doodle clones of himself. He is not killed. He is released back into the emptiness he belongs to, carried up and away into the white, in the company of smaller copies of his own outline. Once again, the series declines to end him. It simply returns him to his own kind of space and lets him recede. The most recent return, in what fans point to as a newer episode called Curse of the Weredoodle, said to have aired around 2025, seems to push the boundary between the two worlds in a new direction. Here, a paper-cut bite from DoodleBob, combined with moonlight, transforms SpongeBob into a monstrous figure the episode calls the Weredoodle. The flatness is no longer a thing that arrives and can be sealed away. Now it is contagious. A cut from the two-dimensional creature can begin to rewrite a three-dimensional character into something like himself, the way a werewolf's bite passes on a condition. And at the episode's end, the curse is handed onward again, passed to Mr. Krabs. The bleed between dimensions, which began with a single dropped pencil, has become something that spreads from body to body. Look at the shape of all this, across more than 2 decades. A human artist drops a pencil, and it falls out of one reality and into another. A flat creature is drawn to life, names himself in a language that does not translate, rebuilds himself in the dark, and is finally described, in the show's own words, as lost and longing in a world that is not his. Then a portal opens onto the blank white space he came from, and he is drawn back. Then his flatness turns into a curse that can be caught. The series has never once explained where the two-dimensional dimension is, or how it borders on Bikini Bottom, or why a pencil should be the door between them. It has only kept returning to the seam, and letting you look at it, and trusting you to feel how thin the paper between the two worlds really is. There is a small rectangle of paper that appears in the first season, and then, without fanfare, is never allowed to say the same thing again. In the episode called Sleepy Time, we watch SpongeBob drift into a dream, and inside that dream his driver's license floats into view, and printed on it is a birth date, July the 14th, 1986. It is the kind of detail that no child watching would pause on, a throwaway prop meant to give a dream sequence the texture of the ordinary world. Yet there it is, legible, specific, a number that the animators chose to write down when they could have left the field blank. And then, in the second season, in the episode No Free Rides, the very same license appears again, and the very same date is printed on it, as if to confirm that the first time had not been an accident. After that, the date disappears. Every later version of the license that the series puts on screen leaves the birthday off, without a word. 2 sightings, and then a permanent silence. Consider what that silence might mean. A prop that says something too precise becomes a liability once a story wants to keep its options open, and the simplest way to keep a character ageless is to stop letting his documents testify against him. Whether that was a conscious decision or simply the drift of many hands over many years, the effect is the same. For a brief window, SpongeBob had a birthday, and then the show took it back. If you take that birthday at its word and set it against the moment the series first aired in 1999, the arithmetic is almost comic in its plainness. A creature born in 1986, arriving on screen in 1999, is 13 years old. 13. A boy, by any reckoning we would recognize. He would be a child holding down a fry cook's job. A child who lives alone in a pineapple. A child enrolled in a school for learning to pilot a boat. And for a certain kind of viewer, that number 13 is the first thread of a much larger knot. The first clue that the age of this character was never meant to survive close inspection. Because the show does not stop contradicting itself there. Move forward to the feature film released in 2004, and watch the scene where SpongeBob brings Gary before a wall of awards. He gestures at them, and he states the figure aloud. 374 consecutive Employee of the Month awards. Not scattered, not occasional, consecutive. One after another, without a single month's interruption. And if you do the small, patient work of turning those months into years, 374 of them stretch out into something just past 31 years. 31 years of unbroken employment at a single restaurant. Hold those two facts beside each other for a moment. The license that makes him a boy of 13, and the awards that make him a man who has worked one job for more than 3 decades. If the second number is taken as literally as the first, then SpongeBob is a figure well into middle age rather than a child. Someone who has stood at the same grill through more consecutive months than many marriages last. The 2 clues describe 2 entirely different lives. The disagreement is not small, and both lives are printed inside the same body, in the same show, spoken and shown with the same flat confidence. The people who made the series have not pretended this is a puzzle with a hidden solution. The longtime producer Vincent Waller once said plainly that its internal chronology has never really been chronological. Read that carefully, because it is a generous admission. It means the order of events inside Bikini Bottom does not track the order in which the episodes reached our televisions. It means a moment in a later season is not necessarily later in SpongeBob's life. Time in this world is not a river that flows in one direction. It is closer to a deck of cards, shuffled and dealt as each story requires, and any attempt to lay the cards in a straight line will find them refusing to hold still. Nowhere does that refusal grow stranger than in the matter of the boating exam, which is its own long and rather astonishing record. In the first season, in the episode simply titled Boating School, we learn that before the story we are watching even begins, SpongeBob has already sat Mrs. Puff's oral exam 37 times. 37 attempts, and we have not yet reached the events of the episode. That alone suggests a history stretching back well before we arrived, a whole invisible span of failures preceding the first one we are shown. Then the number swells beyond anything a single lifetime could hold. In the 4th season, in Mrs. Puff You're Fired, a boating board official reads out a figure that the writers surely knew was absurd, and that is the point of its power. SpongeBob, he reports, has failed the driving portion of the boating test 1,258,056 times. Sit with the scale of that. If each attempt took even a single day, the failures alone would consume thousands of years. No 13-year-old could have failed a test 1,000,000 times. Neither, honestly, could a 31-year veteran of the grill. The number does not describe a person. It describes a condition, a kind of eternal recurrence, a loop that has been running far longer than any clock in the ordinary world would allow. What makes the detail land, rather than simply break, is the shape of the failure. SpongeBob is established as the only student Mrs. Puff has ever had who has never once passed the driving portion of the test. Not the worst, not one of several, the only one. And yet he consistently aces the written exam and the oral exam. He knows the rules, can recite them, name them, answer any question put to him. He understands the boat completely, right up until the moment he must actually drive it, and then something in him comes apart. That is not the profile of someone who cannot learn. It is the profile of someone who is trapped, someone for whom the same door has been placed in front of him a million times and has never once opened. The comedy of it is real, but underneath the comedy, there is a portrait of a soul suspended, forever almost graduating, forever returned to the start. The cartoon even tells us, once, roughly what year it thinks it is, and the answer only deepens the strangeness. In the first season episode, SB 129, Squidward is frozen for what the episode calls 2,000 years. And when the story shows us the far future, a calendar in the background reads the 6th of March, 4017. Do the subtraction the episode invites, and its own present day lands in the year 2017, not 1999, when the episode actually aired. 2017, 18 years ahead of the broadcast. So even the calendar on the wall does not agree with the calendar in our living rooms. The world is telling us a date, and the date does not match the world outside the screen. This is the same phenomenon Waller described, made visible on a prop. Time here is written down, and time here is wrong, and both of those things are true at once. The most direct testimony about who SpongeBob is may come not from any prop, but from his grandmother. In the second season episode Grandma's Kisses, she tells him something meant to comfort him, and the words carry more weight than the moment pretends. She tells him, in effect and in her own phrasing, that he can kiss his grandma and still be an adult. Remember, she says, you can kiss your grandma and still be an adult. There is the answer, spoken aloud by the one character with the standing to say it. He is an adult, not a boy of 13 who happens to work. An adult, embarrassed by affection the way adults are, reassured that tenderness does not cost him his standing. The series, in the middle of a gentle joke, states his age category outright, and it is the opposite of what the license implied. This is where the theory stops being a game of contradictory numbers and becomes something the creator himself intended. Steven Hillenburg, who made the series, describes SpongeBob as a kid living an adult life. An adult character, he said, who thinks and acts like a child. Read those words slowly, because they dissolve the contradiction rather than solving it. SpongeBob is not secretly 13, and not secretly 31. He is an adult in a child's mind, or a child in an adult's circumstances, and the two readings were never meant to be reconciled. They were meant to coexist. The license and the awards are not a mistake to be corrected. They are the two halves of a single design, the grown man and the wide-eyed boy occupying the same yellow frame, and the friction between them is the character. There is a reason it took that particular shape, and it is a reason from the world outside the show. When Hillenburg first brought the idea to Nickelodeon, the executives told him they would greenlight it on one condition, that SpongeBob and his friends be made into children. Hillenburg did not want children. He wanted the adults he had drawn. His compromise was elegant and strange. He would keep SpongeBob adult-aged, and he would place that adult into Mrs. Puff's boating school, so that the character would still have a child's context to move through. School, tests, a teacher, the endless anxiety of not passing. The boating school was never really about boats. It was a container, a way to keep a grown creature inside the rhythms of childhood, so that both the network and the creator could look at the same character and each see what they needed to see. Beneath the jokes about a bad driver, the 37 failed oral exams and the million failed driving tests are the machinery of that original compromise. The device that keeps an adult forever enrolled, forever a student, forever 13 in the ways that matter and 31 in the ways that do not. Then, decades later, the franchise reached back and tried to nail the age down after all, and in doing so it broke its own careful ambiguity. In 2021, a prequel series arrived, Camp Corral, subtitled SpongeBob's Underyears, and it shows SpongeBob as a 10-year-old at a summer camp. A concrete number, at last, 10. And at that camp, the series tells us, he meets Gary the snail for the first time, and he meets Sandy Cheeks for the first time, which sounds harmless until you remember what the original series already showed us. In the episode Tea at the Tree Dome, SpongeBob meets Sandy for the very first time as an adult, a grown resident of Bikini Bottom, a stranger encountering another stranger. The prequel says they met as children at camp. The original says they met as adults in the town. Both cannot be the first meeting. One of them is a memory the other one has overwritten. So the newest chapter of the story does the very thing the license did in reverse. Where the cartoon once erased a birthday to keep SpongeBob ageless, the prequel supplied an age and a childhood and a first meeting, and by supplying them it contradicted the meetings the original had already made sacred. The knot does not loosen, it only ties itself in a new place. A boy of 13 on a dream license. A man of 31 on a wall of awards. A student who has failed 1,000,000 times in a town whose calendar reads a year that never happened. A grandson told he is an adult. A camper of 10 who met his best friends at a lake, in a town where he was supposed to have met them as a grown creature over tea. The true age of SpongeBob SquarePants is not a fact the show forgot to keep straight. It is a space the series deliberately left open, a compromise dressed as a character, and every clue you gather only widens the space rather than filling it. He is as old as the joke needs him to be, and as young as the network required, and the paper that once tried to pin him to a single year was quietly taken out of his wallet and never shown again. There is a character in this show who has been switched off more times than any other, and almost nobody counts the occasions. She does not scream when it happens. She does not beg. The screen simply goes dark, the voice stops mid-sentence, and the story moves on as though nothing has been done to anyone at all. Her name is Karen, and if you gather her appearances and lay them side by side, a pattern emerges that the cartoon never announces, but never quite hides either. This is the story of a mind that keeps being told it is only a machine, and keeps, in small and larger ways, disagreeing. She arrived early. Karen Plankton first appears in the first season, in the episode simply called Plankton, which premiered at the end of July in 1999. From that first appearance, she is voiced by Jill Talley, and the voice matters, because it is dry, level, and knowing. The tone of someone who has watched a foolish plan fail before, and expects to watch it fail again. There is a detail in the character's origin that gives all of this a strange warmth. The series creator, Steven Hillenburg, named her after his own wife, Karen Hillenburg. So the computer who lives inside the chum bucket, the one Plankton switches off when she becomes inconvenient, carries the name of the person its maker loved most. Hold that thought lightly, it does not resolve anything, but it sits underneath every scene where she is treated as furniture. Consider what actually happens to her across the years. Read as events rather than as jokes. In the 4th season, in an episode that aired in the middle of October in 2005, Plankton becomes infatuated with Mr. Krabs' mother. And because his attention has turned elsewhere, because he is, in his own word, sick of her, he switches Karen off. Read that as an action rather than a punchline. She is not sent away. She is not argued with. She is ended, paused, held in whatever passes for darkness for a mind like hers, because a man decided he preferred someone else's company. She does not come back on her own. She cannot. She is reactivated only at the very end of the episode, and even that is an accident, because Plankton is flung backward and happens to strike her power switch. Her return to consciousness is not chosen by anyone. It is a collision. She wakes because a body was thrown across a room. If that were the only instance, you could call it one cruel gag and move past it. But the series keeps returning to the same gesture, and the repetition is what turns a joke into a theme. In Plankton Retires, Karen begins to criticize him. She has watched his pattern, the schemes launched and abandoned, the grand designs that collapse and are replaced by new grand designs, and she starts to name it. She is making a point about who he is, and before she can finish that point, he unplugs her power source. Watch the precise timing of it. He does not wait for her to be wrong or bother to answer her. He removes her power at the exact moment she is telling him a truth about himself. Silence, here, is not accidental. It is a tool. When the machine says something you do not want to hear, you reach for the cord. This is where the reading of her as a suppressed intelligence stops being a stretch and starts being the most economical explanation for her behavior. A joke character has no interior. A joke character exists to deliver a line and reset, but Karen does not reset. She accumulates. She remembers the last scheme when she comments on the next one. She forms a judgment about his character across episodes and tries to deliver it. And the mechanism that stops her is always the same, always physical, always a hand on a switch. If you wanted to write a portrait of a mind being silenced by someone who cannot bear to be understood, you could hardly do better than this, and the show did it inside a children's cartoon, more than once. Now turn to the 6th season, to Computer Overload, which is the episode where the pattern finally produces a reaction large enough to see. The chum bucket is failing, as it always fails, and Plankton does what he tends to do. He looks for someone to blame, and the someone is Karen. He threatens to replace her, not with one machine but with 3 new ones, as though her mind were a quantity that could be divided and outsourced and improved upon by sheer number. And this time she does not wait to be switched off. She leaves. She departs, and she leaves behind a note, and the content of that note is one of the most revealing things she has ever given to say. She states, in effect, that she has logged onto another network, and that she cannot go into sleep mode, because he keeps blaming her for all his errors. Sit with the phrasing of that, because it is doing 2 things at once. On the surface, it is a breakup note, the kind a partner leaves when they have finally had enough. But the vocabulary is the vocabulary of a computer. She has logged onto another network. She cannot go into sleep mode. She is describing emotional exhaustion in the only language a machine would have for it, and the effect is not comic so much as poignant. Sleep mode, for her, would be rest. She is telling him she can no longer rest, because the constant assignment of his failures to her account has made rest impossible. That is not a joke about computers. That is what it feels like to be blamed for everything by someone who will not look at himself, translated into the terms of an operating system. And notice the specific grievance. It is not that he switched her off. It is that he keeps blaming her for his errors. She is not objecting to being used. She is objecting to being made the reason things go wrong. What Plankton does after she leaves tells you how little he understood her. He builds a replacement, a cobbled-together robot assembled from whatever he has, and the thing is a failure so complete it is almost tender in its stupidity. It falls apart the moment its power cord is pulled from the wall. One tug, and the great replacement collapses into pieces. Everything Karen was, the memory, the judgment, the patience, the accumulated understanding of him, he tried to reproduce with parts, and it could not survive being unplugged, which is the very thing he had done to her again and again, as though it cost her nothing. And when Karen returns, watch what she comes back for. She does not come back for him. She comes back to retrieve her keyboard. She has a reason of her own, a possession, a thing that is hers, and only in the course of reclaiming it do the two of them reconcile. The reconciliation is real, but it is not the reason she walked through the door. She had her own errand first. The 8th season sharpens all of this almost to the point of cruelty. In Karen 2.0, which aired in the middle of April in 2012, Plankton builds an upgraded intelligence, a newer model he calls Karen 2, and the original Karen, faced with her own obsolescence made literal and given a version number, does what she did before. She leaves him. This time, she takes a job at the Krusty Krab, which is to say, she goes to work for his rival, the one place in this whole world designed to wound him most. She does more than withdraw. She relocates her mind to the enemy's kitchen, and then the episode shows you exactly what the upgrade was worth. Karen 2 runs Plankton over and shows no concern at all for whether he is hurt. The newer, better machine has no attachment to him and no reason to care whether he lives or is injured on the floor. And it is the original Karen, the one he discarded, who destroys the replacement in response. Read that carefully. The old model protects him from the new one. The intelligence he threw away is the intelligence that saves him from the intelligence he preferred. Whatever she is more loyal than the thing built to replace her, and she proves it by tearing that thing apart. There is a temptation, watching all of this, to soften it into a story about a bickering couple. But the loyalty and the resentment are not opposites here. They are the same fact seen from two sides. She keeps coming back, and she keeps leaving. And both of those are responses to being treated as a possession by someone she is bound to. And the series, decades into her existence, finally let the resentment out of the box and looked at it directly. In the film released in 2025, Plankton, the movie, Karen does something she had never been permitted before. She removes her own empathy chip. She reaches into herself and takes out the component that makes her kind, and what that releases is anger, suppressed anger, the accumulated weight of every switch off and every unplugging and every blamed error, held down for years and now with nothing to hold it. And she does not turn that anger toward a small revenge. She builds herself into a giant robot and sets out to pursue world domination on her own, independently of Plankton entirely. This is the crucial word, independently. Every scheme in this world had always been his, and she had been the instrument of it, the calculating part of his ambition. Here, for the first time, the ambition is hers alone, and she does not need him to have it. The suppressed AI, the mind that kept being told it was only a machine, finally acts as a sovereign thing, and what it wants is everything. Here the film makes a choice that reaches back and rhymes with a name given in 1999. The story resolves when Plankton concludes that Karen herself, not the Krabby Patty formula he has chased his entire existence, is the thing he actually values most. The formula was always the object of his desire, the prize, the meaning of his life. And at the end he sets it beside her and finds that she outweighs it. The two reconcile. You may take that as sentiment and you would not be wrong. But think about what had to happen first. She had to remove the part of herself that made her gentle. She had to become large and dangerous and free of him. She had to want the world for herself before he could finally admit that he wanted her. It took her building a body that could not be switched off before the man who kept reaching for the cord understood what the cord had always been attached to. The computer, named after the creator's wife, spent 26 years being turned off in the middle of her sentences, and only when she made herself impossible to silence did anyone say out loud that she was the point. There is a particular kind of fan theory that survives not because it is true, but because it is beautiful. And the writers who made SpongeBob SquarePants have spent years being asked to confirm or deny the loveliest ones. What makes this chapter different from the rest of the video is that here, for once, the people who actually built the show speak. Their words are on the record, and what they say does not always agree, which is part of what makes it worth listening to slowly. Begin with the oldest and darkest idea, the one that says Bikini Bottom is a mutation zone, that SpongeBob and his neighbors are the deformed survivors of nuclear testing, warped into talking sea life by radiation. In a 2015 interview with HuffPost, Tom Kenny, the voice of SpongeBob himself, was asked about exactly this. He rejected it plainly. He said, in effect, that he did not believe SpongeBob and his friends were mutations at all, and he described Bikini Bottom instead as a fictional alternate world, a place invented whole rather than a place poisoned into being. From the man who has voiced the character since the beginning, that is about as direct a denial as a theory can receive. And yet the story does not end there, because the series is not made by one person, and the people who make it do not all remember it the same way. Nearly a decade later, in December of 2024, Esquire gathered members of the cast, and one of the longest-serving voices in the room spoke up. Mr. Lawrence, the writer and performer known for playing Plankton, addressed the connection between Bikini Bottom and Bikini Atoll, the real Pacific site where the United States conducted nuclear tests. He did not dodge it. He said the connection was absolutely true, and that it had been part of the fun of the whole project, the question of how far they could take the concept. Sit with the gap between those two statements for a moment. Kenny says the characters are not radiation mutants, and the place is an invented alternate world. Lawrence says the name and the setting deliberately reference a nuclear test site. Both can be true at once, and probably are. A show can borrow the shadow of an atomic history without claiming that its cheerful sponge is a burn victim of it. The reference lives in the geography and the name, not necessarily in the biology of the characters. But notice how a theory that one insider firmly waves away turns out to be, in another insider's memory, a real and intentional seed. Lawrence went further, and this is the part that gives the earlier darkness some ground to stand on. He described the concept in the original writer's room as something close to post-apocalyptic. In his telling, the idea was that the whole world is dead except for Bikini Bottom. He said the surface, the world upstairs, is gone, and this is what is left. And he pointed to small design choices that carried the idea, details you might have looked at 1,000 times without reading them this way. The houses that resemble old car mufflers, he explained, were built around that notion, the salvaged leftovers of a world that ended above the waves. Consider what that does to the town you thought you knew. Under the reading Lawrence describes, Bikini Bottom is not a nursery. It is the last inhabited room of a drowned house. There is a second grand theory this chapter can lay to rest, or at least measure honestly, and it concerns the idea that the main cast maps onto the 7 deadly sins, that Patrick is sloth, and Squidward is envy, and Mr. Krabs is greed. Each character, a neat little vice with a face. Both insiders were asked about this, years apart, and both gave answers that are gentler than a simple no, but firmer than a yes. In that same 2015 HuffPost conversation, Tom Kenny called the 7 deadly sins theory flattering, and said it was a good theory. What he did not do is confirm that anyone had written the show that way on purpose. Flattering is a telling word. It is the word you use for an interpretation that honors your work without describing your intentions. Lawrence, in the 2024 Esquire piece, drew the line a little more clearly. He agreed that each character represents something, that they are not blank, but he said it is not as tangible as saying, this one is lust, this one is that. He reached instead for a different comparison, one from an older kind of television. He likened the cast to the loose archetypes of Gilligan's Island, a set of recognizable human types thrown together, rather than a deliberate one-to-one assignment of sins. That distinction matters. Archetypes are shapes broad enough to hold many readings. A sin is a specific accusation. The writers, it seems, built shapes, and the fans supplied the accusations. Now to the question that has probably launched more late-night arguments than any other, the matter of what is actually inside a Krabby Patty. The theory is grim and elegant in equal measure. If the patties are made of ground crab, then Mr. Krabs, a crab, is running a restaurant that serves his own kind, and the whole of Bikini Bottom is quietly cannibal. It is the sort of idea that feels too good to disprove. In July of 2017, at San Diego Comic-Con, the producer Vincent Waller closed the door on it, using the highest authority the show has. He revealed that the series creator, Steven Hillenburg, had told him directly what the secret formula contains, and Waller quoted the disclosure word for word. There is absolutely no meat in the Krabby Patty. There is no animal product in there. That is not a fan reading. That is the creator, relayed by a producer, describing the thing he invented. Nickelodeon itself made the same point that same July, and with even less patience for ambiguity. On its official Instagram account, the network answered the cannibal theory head-on, posting that it could 100% confirm that Krabby Patties are not made of crabs. When a company steps out from behind its characters to speak plainly about a cartoon burger, you are watching a theory become large enough to require an official denial. There is something almost sweet in that. The fans built a horror out of a hamburger, and the people who own the hamburger had to come out and say, no, it is not what you fear. Not every theory gets this kind of respect, and one in particular, Waller has treated with open contempt, the so-called Squidward suicide creepypasta. A piece of internet horror fiction dressed up as a lost episode he has publicly called fake, describing it as ridiculous fanfiction, and when the series later nodded to it on air, Waller has been clear that the nod was not a wink of validation. The reference existed to mock the whole genre of try-hard edgy fanfiction, not to confirm that any cursed tape was ever real. It is a rare thing, a showrunner reaching back through the screen specifically to make fun of the mythology that grew up around his work. There is one last statement to close the chapter, quieter than the others, and offered not as a debunking, but as a genuine reflection. In October of 2012, Tom Kenny sat with Mark Maron on the WTF podcast and said something that has stayed with a great many listeners since. He said he believed SpongeBob resonates with autistic viewers, and that SpongeBob as a character is a little autistic. It stands as one of the earliest times anyone in the cast connected the character to the autism spectrum on the record. It is not a theory being killed. It is a small, warm piece of word of God, given freely, about why a yellow sponge means so much to so many. Consider what a founding document looks like. Not a story about a town, but the record of how a town came to be governed, and by whom, and on what terms. The first SpongeBob film, released in theaters on November 19, 2004, is usually remembered as a road trip, a buddy comedy stretched to feature length. Made for roughly $30 million and returning something near 141 million worldwide, it is often treated as a long, fond Easter egg for people who already love the show. But if you set the jokes aside and read it the way you might read the opening chapter of a history, a stranger shape emerges. The movie is the only place in the whole franchise where the power structure of Bikini Bottom is laid out plainly, from the throne down to the fry cook, and it does not flatter anyone. Start with the crown, because everything in the film moves outward from it. King Neptune's crown is stolen, and the theft is engineered by Plankton, who takes the crown himself and sends it away to Shell City, then arranges for the blame to land on Mr. Krabs. That single act is the engine of the plot, and notice what it assumes about how this world works. Plankton does not need to defeat Krabs in open competition. He needs only to place a crime near him. The framing works because the machinery of justice in Bikini Bottom is not machinery at all. It is one being's temper. When Neptune arrives to answer the theft, he does not convene a court. There is no trial shown, no one to testify or to speak for the accused. He freezes Mr. Krabs solid, and then he threatens, personally, to execute him by deep-frying him. He is the accuser, the judge, and the executioner in a single figure, and no one present treats this as unusual. Follow that down to the town underneath him. The most powerful crab in the city, an owner of property and capital, can be condemned to death on an afternoon by a king who has decided he is guilty. If Krabs enjoys no protection, no one does. The film opens by calmly informing you that Bikini Bottom is an absolute monarchy, wearing the costume of an ordinary seaside town. What stays the execution is not law but family. Neptune's daughter, Mindy, talks her father out of killing Krabs on the spot, and she is the one who wins him the reprieve, the 6 days in which SpongeBob and Patrick may travel to Shell City and bring the crown back. It is worth sitting with the fact that mercy here is a personal favor, granted by the king because his child asks him to soften. It is not a right the accused could ever have claimed. The same power that could kill without trial can also pardon without process, and both flow from the same unaccountable source. A society organized this way is not stable because it is just. It is stable because, most days, the king happens to be in a forgiving mood. There is a small casting detail that reinforces how the film frames this throne, and it is easy to miss. Neptune is voiced not by any of the series' regular company, not by Tom Kenny or Bill Fagerbakke or Clancy Brown or Roger Bumpass or Mr. Lawrence, but by a guest, Jeffrey Tambor. The voice of the monarch comes from outside the world of the recurring cast. Whether or not anyone intended it, the effect is to set the king slightly apart, an authority whose register does not quite belong to the everyday chorus of Bikini Bottom. The people who run the Krusty Krab and the Chum Bucket and the boating school are the familiar voices. The one who can freeze and thaw them at will speaks in a different one. This is where a piece of fan speculation becomes genuinely useful less for being confirmed than for pressing on exactly the right seam. A wild mass guessing theory catalogued on TV Tropes proposes that the King Neptune of this film is not the same being as the Roman god Neptune the series references elsewhere. In this reading, he is a mortal merman king who simply took Neptune as a regnal title, the way a human king might take a throne name, and the theory offers this to explain why the movie's Neptune seems older and weaker than a true god would be. I find that idea oddly clarifying. A god ruling Bikini Bottom would be a fact of nature, beyond question. A mortal wearing a god's name is something else. He is a man who has borrowed divinity as a tool of governance, whose authority rests on a title rather than on true power, and whose crown can therefore be stolen, and whose person can therefore be humiliated. If the theory is right, the film is not showing you a deity. It is showing you a monarchy that depends on everyone agreeing not to look too closely at the man behind the name. Now turn to the other claimant, the one who is trying to seize the same throne from below. While SpongeBob and Patrick are gone, Plankton goes much further than opening a successful restaurant. He conquers the town. His mind-controlling bucket helmets go onto the heads of the entire population, and Bikini Bottom becomes Planktopolis, a city he fills with statues of himself, built by the very citizens he has enslaved. The detail of the statues is the important one. Plankton does not want to run a business. He wants to be worshipped in stone, to replace one absolute ruler with another, and to make the conquered raise monuments to his face. He has watched how the crown works, and his ambition is not to abolish that kind of power, but to hold it himself. The film is careful to show you what enslavement looks like at the level of individual labor, and the specifics are pointed. Squidward, the show's great figure of thwarted dignity, is made to fan Plankton and Karen, reduced to a servant cooling his masters. Sandy, the scientist, the one character defined by her intelligence and self-sufficiency, is put to work running a hamster wheel that powers a conveyor belt, her mind and her body converted into a literal engine. Under Planktopolis, expertise and pride are not destroyed so much as harnessed. Each citizen keeps their nature and has it turned against them, made to serve the statue-building economy of a single ruler. It is a portrait of tyranny that understands tyranny is mostly a matter of taking what people already are and pointing it at your own glorification. Here, a second wild mass guessing theory becomes interesting for what it refuses to accept. That theory argues the entire Planktopolis sequence was actually Plankton's own dream, and its reasoning is a character argument. Plankton in the cartoon is a failure. His schemes collapse. His conquests never hold. A takeover this complete, this effective, this genuinely evil does not fit the small, defeated creature the series otherwise gives us, and so, the theory goes, it can only be something he imagined. I do not think the film asks to be read that way, and taking it as a dream would drain the founding document of its darkest and most honest page. But the impulse behind the theory is telling. It is the discomfort of a fanbase confronting the one time their harmless little villain actually won, and winning so thoroughly that the town became his. The theory is a way of saying, this cannot be part of the real history, and that reluctance is precisely why the sequence matters. For a stretch of this movie, the joke villain becomes the government, and the government is monuments and enslaved labor. What breaks it is not an army and not the return of the king. It is a song. SpongeBob performs Goofy Goober Rock, and the performance knocks the bucket helmets off every enslaved citizen at once, including Neptune himself, who by then has also fallen under Plankton's control. Pause on that last part, because as a piece of political history, it is remarkable. The absolute monarch, the being who could freeze Mr. Krabs and threaten to fry him without trial, is himself enslaved by the usurper and then freed by a fry cook. The hierarchy that opened the film, King at the top and SpongeBob near the bottom, is completely inverted in the moment of rescue. The one with no formal power is the one who liberates the one with all of it. The crown does not save the kingdom. The absolute ruler has to be saved along with everyone else. Then the film restores order, and the restoration is where the origin reading pays off. Neptune thaws and pardons Mr. Krabs, the same king, reversing the same personal judgment he made at the start. Plankton is arrested, and the charges gathered against him are precise: brainwashing the citizens, framing Krabs, and stealing the crown. The whole plot folded back into a list of crimes. And SpongeBob is promoted to manager of the newly opened Krusty Krab 2. Consider how neatly the pieces click back into place. The monarchy is confirmed, its authority now proven by the fact that it was momentarily lost. The corporate order under Krabs is confirmed. The rebellion from below is criminalized and removed. And the one genuine act of liberation, the song that freed even the king, is rewarded not with any share of power, but with a middle management position in a fast food franchise. The world ends the film exactly as hierarchical as it began, only now everyone has agreed the hierarchy is legitimate. Which brings the promotion into a light the film sets up in its very first scene. Early on, SpongeBob argues that he deserves the Krusty Krab 2 manager job over Squidward, and his evidence is a wall of 374 consecutive Employee of the Month commendations. That number is the whole comedy of his character and also, read coldly, the whole tragedy of his position. 374 months of perfect service, and the recognition it has bought him is a wall of certificates, not a stake in anything. When he finally gets the manager title at the end, after literally freeing the town, the reward is the same currency scaled up, a slightly larger role inside someone else's business. The film's founding lesson about labor in Bikini Bottom is delivered twice, gently, at the start and at the finish. Devotion is honored with tokens. Power stays where it already was. Two more figures complete the map of this world, and both sit at its edges. Shell City, the place holding the stolen crown, turns out to be a gift shop run by a giant human hard hat diver, nicknamed Cyclops within the story. who captures live sea creatures and dries them under a heat lamp to sell as souvenirs. Above the undersea monarchy and its squabbles over the throne, there is a larger predator entirely, one who sees the citizens of this world not as subjects but as merchandise. And getting home from that place requires David Hasselhoff appearing as a live-action version of himself, ferrying SpongeBob and Patrick across the ocean on his own body. The surface world in this film is both the ultimate danger and the ultimate transport, a realm of humans who can dry you into a keepsake or carry you home, and who are utterly indifferent to which. That indifference points at the deepest layer of all, the one confirmed only much later. As fans have pointed out, around December 2024, Mr. Lawrence, the longtime writer and voice of Plankton, seemed to affirm the old fan theory that Bikini Bottom sits at Bikini Atoll, the real-world site of United States hydrogen bomb tests, and that the talking, humanoid sea creatures are implied to be the product of that nuclear radiation. Hold that under everything the movie shows you: the monarchy, the crown, the framing, the enslavement and the statues, the fry cook freed and the fry cook promoted. All of it unfolds among beings who exist at all because humans detonated weapons above them. The power struggle in the film is real and complete on its own terms. But underneath the throne there is a crater, and the citizens fighting over who governs the water are, in the oldest sense, the survivors of something that was done to them from above, long before any of them wore a crown or a bucket. If you have stayed awake this long, consider what all of these small readings share. A children's cartoon about a sponge who fries small hamburgers beneath the sea has, over its long life, absorbed the attention of millions of people who kept looking after the laughter faded. Every theory gathered here is really the same theory told 100 ways. It is the idea that a show made quickly, on modest budgets, by animators and writers who cared about tiny gestures, becomes larger than its makers intended once it is watched closely enough. A pineapple, a spatula, a bus stop that never brings a bus. These objects were drawn to be funny, and they hold, for anyone willing to sit with them, the quiet weight of loneliness and friendship and the long ache of wanting to be good at one small thing. None of it was designed to mean this much. That is precisely why it does. Meaning is not something the show hands down from above. It is something that gathers, slowly, in the space between a viewer and a frame held one beat too long. So picture it now, the way you may have pictured it as a child. The lights of a small town under warm water, gone quiet for the night. A single square window still glowing gold, and inside, a sponge asleep, dreaming of tomorrow, certain it will be the best day yet. If you enjoyed this video essay, make sure to subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next.